As was pointed out to me by a person who shall remain nameless, D is also for DYEL. Bro, do you even lift? Well, there you have it. Hello, and welcome once again to Frankly. The nameless person, of course, was the noodle-armed Walter, who from the safety of his little computer console and from the weird, alternate reality warped David Lynch universe that his melted mind inhabits, dared to accuse me of being a DYEL forgot.
Are you sick of being an urban bugman? Would you like to live in the Shire with me? Get Frodo power! Shire pilled and Hobbit maxed.
Terms and conditions apply. Your feet may disappear in a puff of smoke.
Why are you here? Why am I here? Why are any of us here? I'm here today to talk to you about disenchantment. Why have I put on my wizard hat, you might rightfully ask? Why do I wave my magic wand, as if binding a spell? I've spoken to you about detransition, about the fact the liberal system is dissolving, and that what we're all experiencing is a weird form of detransitioning from an insane cult that told you that things were one way, but in fact they are the other. As we are all beginning to find out, they don't think it be like it is, but it do. I talked to you about the 20th century's history as being a sort of myth that's been created to manufacture mass belief in a liberal system that's now dissolving. I talked to you about how desublimation was used to make you feel free as your entire reality was dissolved into a series of endless consumer options, none of which actually liberated you. And today I'm going to talk to you about the magic spells that have been used to sell you into the belief in a pseudo-reality. Today we will unweave the satanic rainbow that has been cast over your entire lives. Today, ladies, gentlemen, and children of all ages, today's show is about disenchantment. What do I mean by disenchantment? I'm talking about the moment we inhabit, which is about the movement from the magic spell of Satan into the real. How reality itself became so shocking, so controversial, and yet so glaringly obvious that its mere mention could see your life ruined, or you face a punitive prison sentence. How did this happen? How could we get into this situation? As I've explained to you before, we live in an enormous experiment to replace our civilization. And one way in which this is done is to prohibit the mention of the awful reality that it is replacing your civilization with. One way that this is done is to make it illegal for you to notice reality. And this is done by weaving a series of terrible voodoo spells that curse anyone who dares to tell the truth. I've recently asked you to engage in thought experiments. As you can see, engaging in experimental thought carries a certain risk. Nevertheless, come with me, if you will, to another thought experiment. Imagine that you lived under a system that wanted to replace all the nations with a global supermarket place. A borderless paradise, if you like. A Star Trek Netflix universe of pure harmony, in which the only unifying principle is the aggressive seeking of bargains. And those bargains, of course, include you and your children and your way of life. Everything reduced in a cut price, everything must go sale, which includes the value of human life as well. Imagine for a second that's where we have all had to live. And we've called this the most supreme and wonderful system that could ever be imagined. That, of course, was liberal democracy. And one of the ways that it secured its power was by making the noticing of things illegal. What kind of things did it want to prohibit, I wonder? Well, if you seek to replace all the nations with a borderless international supermarket browsed by hostile strangers, as these aggressive bargain hunters arrive, some problems may occur. there may be some friction in that awful place called reality in which most of us are now compelled to live. However, if you notice these problems, well, there's a problem there, isn't there? There's a problem there for the people who've sold you this system. And how do they make this problem go away? Racism. Poof. Now there are no problems with the multicultural paradise. Have you noticed as well that it's now extremely emancipated? In fact, it's the pinnacle of liberation to murder your own children up to birth. That's what we do in our foggy little island here. Have you noticed too that there's increasing moves to encourage the elderly to see themselves as a terrible burden that is hugely inconvenient and rather interrupting to one's paradisical consumer lifestyle, and so they should exit. They should consider taking the emergency exit. That basically we should kill the elderly because they no longer make us any money and they're getting in the way of our Funko Pop collection. If you think there's something wrong with killing your own offspring in order to live as a strong, independent woman, poof, you're a misogynist. And the problem goes away. They haven't invented a magic word yet to curse you for trying to protect Grandad and Grandma, beloved Nana, from being shoved into a suicide pod for the good of society. But they will do. I'm telling you, they will do. They'll tell you they're coming up with the idea that the elderly are a burden. And of course, they'll just call you beasts of burden, I suppose, if you try and defend the right to life, both at the beginning and the end of life. What are the other magic spells? Well, if you're going to have a permanent war economy, which is what liberal democracy really is, all those wars that were started for mysterious reasons that could never be explained in the Middle East have seen millions of people flood into Europe and now into the United States as well. Millions and millions of them. And to this there is no end. Mysteriously, if you blow people's countries up and destroy any barriers towards them flooding into your nations, they will. Who would have thought it? Now, if you see a problem with starting wars in the Middle East that flood the West with millions of refugees, you might complain about them bringing their own customs and religion with them. Poof! Islamophobia. And the problem is gone, of course. Well, of course it isn't, but you will be gone if you dare to mention it. See how problems can be magically made to disappear if you control people's lives through the threat of imprisonment for noticing reality out loud. If you notice the patterns for these wars, for example, that drive these millions of people into the West, poof! You're anti-Semitic. And your business could be destroyed, and your career, and everything else. Wonderful. You can see how the enchantment works. Racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, misogyny. Of course, who could forget the rainbow magic itself? If you object to putting things into your anus in order to secure yourself a career, poof, and indeed, poof, the operative word, you are a homophobe. If you object to your children being encouraged to mutilate their genitals and take life-changing hormones, which are given to you by a mysterious industry that mysteriously cropped up after this mysterious mass mental illness was mysteriously broadcast through the internet, through things like Tumblr, and in order to become mainstream. If you object to this, poof, you are a transphobe. How on earth did we get to the point where we are ruled by magic spells, by voodoo curses, written by wizards that we will never meet? How did we get to this point, and why? Well, you have 2 points here that I've raised at length in the previous videos. One of them is that the liberal consumer system relies on the magical power of telling people that if they do away with everything they used to believe in, if they do away with God and morality and tradition and customs and the idea of reality itself, then they will be free. You will be free to pursue your own desires. You will be free to do as you please. You will be emancipated, and the liberal system will applaud you as you do this, because you will then dissolve your life into a series of consumer options that may even consume you entirely. If you happen to become a Trannington and actually undergo a transition, what you are doing is becoming a peak consumer product, And this is good because, poof, it makes the line go up. And if we make the line go up, we can ignore the fact that everything else is going down. If I'm going to talk to you about disenchantment, a few words about the history of the term would probably be helpful. Keats said, for example, Keats the poet that is, said that in a poem about unweaving the rainbow that technology was driving the disenchantment of the world, that people no longer believed in the magic of creation and the Lord himself behind it all, because the technological world and scientific progress was solving so many former mysteries. It was removing the magic of creation. When people usually use the term disenchantment, this is usually what they mean. They mean that God has been replaced by progress and that this is inexorable, meaning that it happens just because the calendar flips over and there's nothing we can do about it. Now, what I'm going to talk to you about today is also the fact that this modern progress and the modernism and modernity it produced, the mentality it produced, hasn't liberated people at all. And indeed, it has not liberated us from superstition. It has replaced superstition with superstitions of its own. Remember the magic spells that we opened with? Islamophobia, homophobia, racism, misogyny, anti-Semitism. What these are basically all there to prohibit is the noticing of reality. People do not generally object to other people for no reason at all. And yet we are told in the enchanted world of the liberal system that that's the only reason that people object to other group behaviours. Simply put, if you behave objectionably, people are liable to object to you. It's impossible to have a fantasy system, and the liberal system is a fantasy system. It's impossible to have one if you still permit people to notice basic facts about reality. So what you do is you attach very strong negative connotations to the noticing of basic reality. And this encourages people to retreat from reality into an endless range of consumer options, from consuming popular video games such as Sonic the Hedgehog or Pikachu, melding them into strange and weird new combinations, to inventing new lifestyles based upon consumer products like My Little Pony. And of course, where does this end up politically? You end up having to invent, as the European Union has, a wonderful thing called the European Democracy Shield. The European Democracy Shield was invented last summer. And the reason why it's here is because it needs to shield democracy from its enemies. What are the enemies of democracy? Well, the facts. It needs to protect you, the voters, from factists like me. Basically, the European Democracy Shield is a very pleasant brand name for the censorship of around 300 plus million people in the West. Britain is doing something very similar as well, moving with its online safety laws to prevent you from finding out all the dreadful things they've been up to, including in that atrocious Ukraine war. If you ever find out how your taxes are paid, then you probably dislike the government intensely. And to prevent you from destabilising this perfect democracy where you pay taxes to destroy your life, your way of life, and your entire civilization, and so your children become insane perverts who hate you and force you to commit suicide the second you show any signs of vulnerability. To preserve that system, you must be protected from the truth. In this enchanted world, we are all free to destroy ourselves, but we aren't free to do anything good because the system hates anything good. As you can see from the dereliction of my erstwhile acquaintance, Walter, what the system has produced in our younger generation is a bunch of people who are increasingly hostile to reality itself. Now, it's not just the Zoomers and it's not just the Boomers. But if we want to get beyond the generational warfare of these socioeconomic groupings, which is effectively what they are, these terms really were invented so people could sell you more things to fill up the sucking, howling void in your life that the liberal experiment had replaced all the meaning in your life with. In order to keep selling you these consolation prizes of cut-price tat, they invented these terms, these generational terms. But what the Zoomers and the Boomers both have in common is that they've been seduced into basing their entire lives and their existence on a kind of screen-based simulacrum of reality. For the boomers, it was TV. You could easily call them just television believers. They're the only people that still watch TV. Bless them. Bless them. Pray the rosary for the boomers sometimes, that they may detransition themselves from their simulation of the real. The Zoomers too have been screen-based to a point that was unimaginable in the 1960s when the Cultural Revolution was put upon you, where we saw the West transformed in the church, in the state and in society, in the white heat of technology, in the rush of progress. All these things didn't happen entirely by accident. If you want to go down a separate little rabbit hole, have a look at what Timothy Leary said about the CIA and LSD. Timothy Leary, who is the LSD guru, former Harvard professor of psychology no less. Nothing to see here. The CIA ran large-scale experiments on LSD in the late 1950s, which put LSD into the hands of people like Timothy Leary and R.D. Laing, and then you ended up with all these weird psychiatrists and psychologists and so on, leading a kind of campus consciousness revolution where people would take powerful hallucinogens and think out of the box because they were out of their boxes. Oddly enough, this was initially promoted by the CIA. So why would they do this? Why would they want people getting out of their boxes? Why would we end up with people trying to enchant themselves through the use of drugs? Now, if you fast forward to today, almost everybody that you meet is on some form of drugs, legal or otherwise. Women take hormone disruptors, which they then discover disrupt their personalities entirely to the point where they don't know who they are. These are birth control pills, by the way, but they don't work by magic. It's not, poof, no more babies. Now, the way these contraceptives work, oral contraceptives, is they disrupt your hormones. And what are your hormones? Hormones are the chemicals that tell you when to feel happy and sad and when you like or dislike something. And many women report their personalities have changed so much they no longer know who they are. Now, the same kind of thing goes on with antidepressants, I think. At a guess, maybe 1 in 4 adults take these, maybe more. Who knows? I stopped paying attention after reading things like Oliver James's work on affluenza. But at that point, around 15 years ago, something like that, it was about a quarter of adults would take them throughout their lives. And they too disrupt your hormones. Some say permanently. So what does this mean? It means that drugs, legal and otherwise, are so prevalent in our society that most people no longer know who they are. And this is a form, if you like, of negative enchantment. Again, these things are side effects of the technological and social revolution that was promoted aggressively through increasingly refined techniques in the 20th century to push us all into a system where we can consume what we want, where being free, being liberated is all that matters. But what that really means is buying more things to change your own mind, buying more things so you don't have any children, so you can carry on buying more things. This kind of enchantment is also wearing off. Disenchantment is not just about magic voodoo words to stop you noticing reality. It's not just anti-noticing. Disenchantment's also the general realization that you were promised a paradise on earth of perfect liberation that would eventually take over the whole world. But it hasn't happened. We've got hell on earth instead. It's not heaven, is it? And you still have people coming out like Dr. Pangloss telling you all is for the best, in the best of all possible worlds. But this is a shrinking minority. That shrinking minority is the liberal governments of the West. Their elite power is circumscribed by everyone sane who no longer believes in their enchanting, spellbinding attempts to tell you that everything that's bad for you is in fact good for you. As you've probably realised yourself if you're an aggressive noticer, behaviour and not insanity is the cause of so-called prejudice. Group behaviour is the cause of so-called stereotypes. You might be interested to learn, since I've mentioned him before, that it was Walter Lippmann who first came up with the idea of stereotypes. He said that you could group people into certain groups in order to better control them through the use of mass propaganda, and that was also involved consumer propaganda, which, as I told you in the previous video, advertising is basically applied psychoanalysis. So it was Walter Lippmann who invented the term stereotypes, and he was the man who also helped to invent the multilateral and multinational system of control that we know as liberal democracy, whose moment is now past. and all the magic spells it wove to bind you into its system are now dissolving. This is the moment of disenchantment. What are people disenchanted with? They're disenchanted with the whole system, the idea that somehow things would always get better, that you'd be liberated by this, that the self, being the axis of the world, would be the best system of all. Now bear in mind that the idea of delimited desire and the only thing that matters is yourself and realising your own will in the world also happens to be the basis of Western occultism under figures like Aleister Crowley. Consider again that it might not be so absurd to describe this as a diabolical system. If you want to see what a system does, look at its effects. Don't listen to its promises, look at its effects. And if you seek the monument of this system, look around you. As you can see, Len has made an attempt to apologise for his appalling whiteness. I'm not sure whether Len's new direction actually helps or hinders his cause to reach out beyond his shockingly pale demographic, but Len has his own ideas about reality. How are people going to deal with this disenchantment? This disenchantment's going to come at an enormous cost to people personally. I've reminded you in the past that what you should do if you yourself are not a casualty, think about this system as a mass casualty event. It might help you to relate to people who you'd otherwise avoid because they're visibly insane, or because they're depressed, or they're miserable, and misery loves company, but we all know that it's toxic in that sense. Try and think of this as a mass casualty event that you're living through, and sincerely see if you have the strength within yourself to help the sick and the wounded. Think of these people as casualties of the system. These people that you're encouraged to see as your enemies and that you hate. Well, you certainly won't agree with them. And yes, some of the things they believe in will be wicked and hateful. Rather beyond hating the sin and loving the sinner, think instead what you can do for them. Even if in some small way you can help to heal the sick and minister to the wounded, you will become a social missionary. And that is entirely contrary to what the liberal consumer system wants you to do. The modern condition is about making the self the axle of the world, and that the wheel of life rotates around you and yourself entirely. But that's not your real self. It's your inner self. It's the self of your fantasies and desires. It's the things that you imagine you want. And why do you imagine you want them? Well, there's an entire system built in manufacturing those desires and packaging them and advertising them to you. And those desires, they don't just range from My Little Ponies, fursuits, Funko Pops, exotic holidays, pampering, crystals, aromatherapy. They don't just range through the entire and deeply suspicious New Age panoply of spiritualized self-indulgence, which is fundamentally evil. They also include your political options, your intellectual and thought leaders, and everything that you consider to be news. Practically all of that too is a product. And when you begin to realize this, it is profoundly unsettling. At first, when you see this glittering world before you, you may greet it with wonder and an invitational sense of delight. I am cheesed to meet you, you may say, but ultimately, it has left you quite discheesed. Most of us have had that feeling before, that we are utterly burned out by the burdens of modern life, by the spellbinding nonsense that we're sold to dissolve ourselves into hire purchase agreements and to eat mass-produced trash and to consume mass-produced entertainment that is also trash. There's endless trash. Most of us know what it feels like to feel like this, to feel annihilated. This is the moment of discheesement.
You have left me quite discheesed.
As if we were Pavlovian dogs that have heard so many bells we've forgotten how to drool. Ultimately, desensitization is happening at the same time as disenchantment. A lot of these tricks no longer work because we've lived long enough under this enchanting system to see that it doesn't deliver on its promises. In fact, it delivers the opposite of them. It doesn't satisfy you. It doesn't free you from yourself. You can't buy yourself into emancipation, but you can buy yourself into debt. Disenchantment is about unweaving the rainbow of debauchery. It's about unweaving the rainbow power, the spellbinding majesty of the promise of the enchanted world of liberal consumerism. But you can see the results around you. Women are beginning to realise that feminism has effectively liberated women from womanhood. Our children are not improved by becoming screen-based dopamine addicts whose minds have been melted by being socialised on the internet through lockdown. Our people are not happier because they're fat and graze on trash. Our politics, our societies are not improved by being told and sold permanent war as progress, whether that's war abroad or war on your entire way of life. We can see that we now inhabit a permanent state of emergency. This is what I mean when I talk to you about disenchantment. The large-scale civilizational experiment has ended in disaster, and we can all see it, even if, in some places, noticing this out loud can cause you to risk losing your liberty and livelihood. Again, the state no longer has the hard power to contain this, because it is the majority of people who are realising this all at once. They're beginning to disbelieve in the magic spells which have been used to control them for decades. In fact, all of our lives. This, I would remind you, is a good thing. People are noticing all of a sudden that total propaganda is everywhere. They're noticing that their cereal boxes try and end-queer their children. They're noticing that their flat-pack furniture comes with an injunction to pay more taxes to change the weather. It's everywhere when you notice it. And you may get depressed by saying, oh dear, the system is total. Its magic spells are everywhere. And yet when people begin to disbelieve in them and they see that that's everywhere, then they disbelieve in everything they've been told by that system. And that's why this is the end for that system. And this, again, is a very good thing. Now, one thing that's remarkable about this is that the modern system, the technological society, the progressives, they all told you that we were going to progress beyond the superstitions of religion, and that people who believed in a God and a natural order and creation, and that men were men and women were women, they were mad. They were idiots. They just believed in fairy tales. And instead, you could be whatever you want to be just by insisting that you are, and then making it illegal to disagree with you. That is clearly not a recipe for sanity. If you decide to make war upon reality, sanity, and God himself, is it any surprise that the result would be chaos and ruin and disorder? Chaos and ruin and disorder. This is the system that you've been told was perfect. And of course, the moment of disenchantment is liberating, genuinely liberating, because these evil spells that have locked you into committing national and indeed personal suicide are now dissolving. And this is a marvellous fact, because it also shows and exposes the lies at the centre of this system entirely. Now, one of the myths of the 20th century is that you can live a life without limits, that liberalism delimits you, that you don't have to listen to morality and tradition, you don't have to believe in God, you don't have to have any restrictions on your behaviour at all. But what that ultimately does is it doesn't liberate you, it annihilates you. It makes your life meaningless and miserable. So you end up playing Cuphead on an array of screens with your e-friends. You end up disappearing into a parasocial simulacrum of reality. You end up like Walter. And Walter hasn't seen most of David Lynch's oeuvre. He hasn't heard the laconic nihilism of Werner Herzog. But I would like you to consider Walter as an example of what our society has done to our youth. Now, Werner Herzog made a film called Jeder für sich, Gott gegen alles. Now, what a remarkable title, yeah? Because I am an intellectual, lol, I can say those things in German, yeah? What they mean is Werner Herzog made a film about Caspar Hauser. And the subtitle of it was Everyone for Himself and God Against All. And it's a true story. It was about a man called Caspar Hauser who was discovered in a cellar in Germany in the 18th century, I think. And the remarkable thing about him was that he was about 30 years old and he'd never been out of the cellar. And all he could say was one sentence, which was, I want to be a noble knight like my father was. He didn't know anything about the world. And the film's about taking him out of the cellar. He's been discovered. He's sitting on some straw. And they take him outside and he doesn't understand perspective. He looks at a tower and he doesn't understand it's far away. And he sees a cow and he sees a horse. And they're trying to teach him how to speak. And he became a fascinating study on human development. Because, of course, he developed in a single locked room and only learning to say one sentence. and had no idea about the external world entirely. Now, if you think about that, go and watch The Enigma of Caspar Hauser. Go look into his tale because, again, it tells you a lot about how people develop in isolation. And then consider what's happened to people as they've become increasingly isolated by the technological consumer system, becoming what you would call over-socialized on internet memes and digital TV and advertisements and saturated with consumer options, which gradually replace all the human relationships in your life with convenient transactions, to the point where reality becomes so disturbing to you that you find it hostile. That's what it does at scale. It makes people averse to real life and averse to real life human relationships. They don't want to go and talk to people anymore because they can't control them. Because instead they've got an algorithm that pipelines and pandas stuff to you. It feeds back stuff to you that you already like, and then you end up only liking what you already like, and then it gives you things that are adjacent to what you like, and eventually you don't like anything outside of that tiny little reality tunnel. But it's not reality. Your focus has been reduced to a dot, like an old television that's being turned off. If you're patterned on machines, you do become machine-like. And I think we're living in a point as well where we're realizing generally that the liberation into technology is producing another form of annihilation. It's annihilating the ability to relate to other human beings, to recognize the beauty of the natural world, for the capacity for the belief in God and the recognition of his presence and the majesty of his creation, which is, of course, the source of all true enchantment. This is why I can sit in front of you in this shed next to Len, despite the fact that I have now improved the facilities. And I can speak to you of the wonder of life, because life is wonderful. Life is beautiful. If you get off the internet and stop listening to people talking to you on it and go and experience it. Try and talk, try and get on with other people in your life. Try and understand who you are. Ask yourself, how much of myself would be left if I didn't have my phone, if my social media vanished, if all the things that I owned were burned down or taken away from me? What would be left of me? How much of me exists? Now, the moment of disenchantment is realizing that these things actually subtract from your life if you're not careful. It's okay to have nice things and go on the internet and so on. But as the Catholic social teaching will tell you, you should keep your life balanced and in order that these things don't get put out of perspective and they don't get an undue significance in your life, in which case they become disordered. Now, of course, we've been told by the modern progressives that the whole concept of sin is backwards, and we've been told by innovative geniuses and humanitarians such as Sigmund Freud that normal life is basically a pathological condition, and if you're sane, you're mentally ill. Have a look again at the voodoo words and how you'll be cursed with transphobia and homophobia and Islamophobia and racism and so on. How you'll be cursed with all these things for just basically noticing things that are there, which is the basis of sanity, which again the Catholic social teaching will tell you is the basis of the theory of knowledge. We should use descriptions, it says, that correspond most closely to what is there. Now, this is also a recipe for going to prison if you happen to live in the United Kingdom. It would be interesting, would it not, to televise my show trial and watch me speaking to the blue-haired commissar who's masquerading as a judge at my Bolshevik show trial and say, well, Your Honour, the Catholic social teaching told me to do it. Not everything begins with a D, of course, but disenchantment is a very good concept. And what I'm trying to tell you is that the life without limits that you've been promised by this system of deliberate enchantment that's used technology to enchant you in many ways, to cast a spell over your mind, to make you cheesed to meet it, and that has left you quite discheesed. This system, you're beginning to understand, has sold you a bunch of lies. And it told you that it was replacing all the stupidity of the past. And why was it? As I've told you before, the liberal system is there to replace your entire civilization with itself. And that includes all the beliefs that animate you, your soul, the belief in God, the belief in Christ, the Christianity that founded European civilization itself, and all the moral values and all the ordering of the world. that flowed from that. To get rid of all that, you needed to sell some fantastical vision, and that was going to be that delimited desire was going to free you all. That you could do you. You could just do it. All of the adverts tell you this in some way. And this moment of disenchantment is about that. It's about people realizing that they've been sold something that wasn't what they expected. And that was their entire way of life. And we're all living in a moment now where these effects are obvious and unignorable. And the states that want to control the mention of these facts, they can't really do it anymore. Because the arguments against the liberal consumer system and its empire of lies and the politics of Satan and the politics of national suicide, they're not created by hate-fueled hobbits such as myself sitting in sheds in the Shire. These are arguments made by reality, and you can't censor reality. You just can't. What you can do is make people despair enough that they spend their lives on screens, and you can control that. Be aware that there's going to be a lot of demoralization right now. That people are going to make money off you on the internet by demoralizing you, telling you that nothing can change, that things will in fact get worse, that it will all be locked down once again. No, I really don't see that happening. I think that there is a lot of truth to the idea that man is not able to control everything. And of course, the Marian prophecies themselves suggest that man's questionable track record might result in some chastisement. I suggest you do pray the rosary. I suggest you do pray to the Holy Mother of God. I suggest you do, even if you don't believe in God. Well, then you'd have nothing to lose by acting as if he were real, would you? Try the boots on for a while and see how your life feels. See what it's like to relieve yourself of the burden of the accursed enchantment of liberal emancipation, where you are the only determining factor in the nature of reality, where you are the axle of the wheel of life, and all the decisions and all the solutions and all the problems ultimately have to be resolved by your personality. It's an enormous relief to realise that there is a God. And it is also wonderful and beautiful because the world for you will become re-enchanted because God is real and he really did make the world. And if he didn't, the best that our friends of the scientific community could come up with is that everything came from nothing. Is it any surprise that the people who insist that everything that came from nothing suddenly are also telling you that everything should go into nothing again, that the beginning of life and the end of life, people should be reduced to nothing as a matter of convenience, and that all that we ever had should be replaced by less than nothing. Yeah. It starts to make sense, doesn't it? That's what progress really is. Mankind has been liberated from meaning and from the natural order of God by a series of increasingly sophisticated superstitions driven and transmitted by technological advancement. And we're beginning to realise that this was not a good idea generally. This is the moment of disenchantment. Once again, you are not obliged to go mad at it. The disenchantment that we're experiencing is a disenchantment of noticing what is really there behind all these weird magic spells. That's an extremely good form of disenchantment. You're basically learning to disbelieve in lies. That is genuinely liberating. And I suggest that you do spend more time in reality as a result. For some people, the degree of dischesement that they experience, please put in 3 dischesement warning. For some people, the degree of dischesement that they will experience in this moment of disenchantment will be so severe that they'll never want to see reality again, and they will disappear even further down the digital rabbit hole of algorithm-created content that encourages them to take refuge from reality forever. Well, I'm afraid that there is going to be a problem for people who cannot adjust to reality, because reality is now winning the argument again. So in order to rehabituate yourself to reality, try talking to some real people. Try doing real things with your life, things that aren't monetized. The upside to disenchantment is that you can finally realize your life. Instead of being sold on a belief that self-realization is all about the things that you buy and the trash that you fill your head and your body with, you can actually see the real limits of yourself and the real limits of how long you may or may not live and what you can achieve in that, and you can reorder your life to that, and this is what you should be doing anyway. What are the actual limits of my behaviour? What are the real limits of my capabilities? It's interesting to find them out. People are good at different things. Go find out what that is, instead of believing that if you pay the educational Ponzi scheme 50, 60,000, 100,000 to become a blue-haired freak and parody of yourself that hates your parents. Instead of doing that, you could probably find out what you're actually good at. Instead of learning to despise everything that is actually good. You can realise the genuine limits of your life, and in this, you can actually have realistic ambitions and achieve them. And that's extremely rewarding. And when you die, you can say, well, I did this. I had a family. I taught my children something realistic. I made this out of my life. Instead of just desperately wondering on your deathbed who's going to curate your social media for you. Well, the way things are going, probably going to be Walter. My social media is not going to be looking too good, is it, Walter? One of the life lessons about disenchantment is how much we've been trained to reject reality because it's offensive to us. In case you haven't noticed, and you probably have, noticing basic things about reality is extremely offensive. Telling people the truth about themselves is the most unforgivable thing you can do, and this produces maximal disenchantment in individuals, and this is one of the reasons why this evil system has been so successful. Because it gradually habituates you to disliking reality, and it tells you, no, you don't have to be who you really are. You can reinvent yourself. You can buy yourself a new face, a new body, a new identity. You don't have to be trapped by these things. You don't have to listen to other people's opinions. And so if you can bear the disenchantment factor of actually facing up to who you are, of accepting that there are limits to life, not just limits to you, to your life, to your capabilities, to your height, but also limits to the actions of humanity in general. You can't just wish things into being. You can't just say that reality is like this and make it so. And that means something for our politics and our expectations. You can change the world for the better if you can tolerate the pain of disenchantment. And if you can let go of these fantasies, if you don't have to live by them, if you don't need these consolation prizes, you can go and look for the real prizes in life and the real treasures, because they are there, behind the lies, behind the voodoo curses, behind all the chaos and nonsense, behind a wicked system that has replaced the common good with an all too common evil. You can see that there is a real world and that there is good in it. And you can be part of that world yourself if you are willing to surrender the lies that you tell yourself in order to cope. Despite my numerous efforts, I still have not experienced that late spurt in life that I'm still looking out for. Walter is about 6'4". Horrifyingly, there is a double Walter who's about 6'7". I keep telling myself that one day I'll wake up and I too will be 6'4". And that people will no longer be looking down on me on the top of my head or using me as a convenient rest for their elbows. Like a little novelty mantelpiece. I have learned to accept my limits. I do occasionally retire into the fantasies of self-extension. But I am trying to learn to live without that crutch. Although I do in fact lift, it hasn't made me any taller. It might make me rounder. I may just get more barrel-shaped. But there it is. Yeah, so there you go, Walter. I do actually pick the weights up, unlike some people I could mention. Try and be an example of sanity, if you like. Try and be an example of someone who hasn't had their mind melted by becoming addicted to lies and wickedness and so on. Try and show people what it's like if you don't directly or indirectly love Satan. That's a good example to show people. Because otherwise, you will experience terminal disenchantment. You will not win people over by pointing out how they have willfully ruined their lives with a promise of liberation. Instead, just demonstrate the alternative by example. You don't even have to say that to people. It's probably not a good idea to go up and correct people in that way. But if you do behave sanely, if you are sane, if you are good, if your life still has meaning, and if you can talk to people seriously about the fact that human life has an essential dignity, and this system has worked to destroy it and replace it with price and number, then they'll probably listen to you. Because even the most hardcore addict to that liberal system is beginning to realise the moment of disenchantment. Ladies, gentlemen, and children of all ages, the spell is wearing off. If you're enchanted by a system of lies, it's hard to see what's going on. Unless you wear a pair of intellectual spectacles, of course. Like I do. Wearing my intellectual spectacles makes me able to see as clearly as Walter does.